Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 97, talking all about Predix UI and Polymer. I am your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me, as always, is Amel Hussein.
Hi, everyone.
And Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And this week we have, again, another very special guest, Eric Knudtson.
Good to be here, Danny.
We're very glad to have you, Eric. So, first off, opening question, introduction. Give us a little bit of background about yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, what you like, where you work, all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So I work at GE Digital in San Ramon, California. We're working on building a platform for the industrial internet. So I have a background. I worked at Microsoft in kind of commercial and consumer business, and I worked at startups and consumer startups. But this is the first industrial company I've ever worked for, and it's really fascinating because I get to do things like visit power plants and factories for giant batteries that run the grid when power plants go down. So really fascinating stuff, and it's just been a really interesting wild ride since I joined in 2013, and I can tell you all about it. I'm a design technologist, which means that I kind of am a designer who programs and a programmer who designs and bridges the gaps between those two worlds.
So what is it like working for such a small startup like GE? I mean, it must be hard going into those places as a start point.
I know, right? There's no money, there's no space, there's no, we're just bootstrapping it. I had to eat ramen this morning.
So, and how is GE getting started sort of in the, wonderful world of Predix? Like, what is Predix?
Yeah, actually, if we can even backtrack it a little bit, I'm really curious to know what GE is doing in the open source community and maybe what led to Predix being open source. Sure.
So Predix itself
we should probably cover what Predix is first.
Yeah, sure. What is Predix? So Predix is a platform meant to provide the structures and tools necessary to deploy industrial internet software applications. So like I was mentioning before, a lot of, the first computers were really applied to many industrial applications. However, that kind of the innovation that has gone on in the consumer space has been ahead of what has been going on in the industrial space. And so Predix is an effort to bring the internet and all of the power of the internet to the industrial world. So if you think about just things like being able to send information and do it securely, and that is difficult to do in an industrial setting because there's higher stakes and larger security concerns. And so instead of moving forward, I think my opinion is that, kind of waited for a platform like Predix to come along and make things available to move forward securely into the space.
Cool. And so you specifically work on Predix UI, correct?
Correct. I do work on Predix UI.
Okay. So the little bit of research that I did is Predix seems to be like a cloud platform for industrial use, and then Predix UI is a UI layer that sits on top of that.
Correct. So Predix is actually a kind of a custom version of Cloud Foundry. So we partnered with Cloud Foundry and Pivotal. We actually own a stake in Pivotal, and we used Cloud Foundry which is an amazing cloud platform, to build out data centers and set up infrastructure for building industrial applications. I work on the UI layer, which is meant to provide kind of an industrial scale user interface design and development system so that the developers developing those industrial internet applications can quickly and easily build a user interface without having to make all of the decisions that they would have to otherwise.
So you've said industrial internet a couple of times. Can you give us an example of what industrial internet would be?
Sure. So if you think about like manufacturing and supply chain of manufactured goods, we currently have an initiative called Brilliant Manufacturing. And if you think about internet in a factory and on a factory floor, what does that mean? What does that do for a factory? Well, we're the company that's at the forefront of discovering and deciding what that's going to be like, and hopefully gaining and delivering the value that's possible into industrial settings.
And the cool thing about Predix is that it actually works on a lot of stuff. Like it is quite a large platform as a whole. You know, when we talk about Predix UI, that's Polymer-based UI components that talk to machine profiles, that run on machines, that talk to the cloud, that deliver information using a very host of services, one of which is MQTT, which I love, and I will. So yeah, that's my plug for MQTT for the day.
Cool. Yeah, we're definitely big fans of MQTT.
So it is a very cool platform.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and we're super hyped about it. I am personally very excited to be using Polymer because it is, for me, the most simple and straightforward paradigm for user interface development that has existed since I started my career in 2001 professionally. So I've been waiting a long time for custom elements, been waiting a long time for HTML imports and templates and shadow DOM and encapsulation and all the benefits. And it just really feels like Christmas every time I go to the polymerproject.org.
Oh, that's great. So I, on the other hand, do not know what MQTT is. Could you maybe elaborate on what that is and what the internet, maybe just a little bit more on what industrial internet is and how you know, machines are using JavaScript, right? Embedded JavaScript.
Yeah, that's another surprise about working at GE. I definitely did not expect to be consulting with people about using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in their power plant interface. But what has happened over the past 20 years is that the web platform has evolved due to the pressure and kind of the demands that web developers have put on it, and that the communications of the entire globe have put on the web platform. So it's become the default or de facto user interface platform as well. Even with strong competitors such as Qt and others. I think, yeah, it's definitely something that's taken over as a default standard. And so, how does JavaScript end up in a power plant? Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to figure out.
Cool. So,
what do you want to know about that?
Oh no, I guess maybe just what the trend is, right? With embedded JavaScript and machines having interfaces now.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's just more and more of a web-like experience that even on a factory floor.
Yeah, definitely. So if you think about it this way, people that are operating a factory or a power plant, they need information, and they need information that helps them do their jobs, and they need it to be correct and fast and available, and they need to be able to share it and do all the things that we do with information on the internet and on the web. And it's even more important for them because they're doing things that are potentially dangerous or with much higher stakes in terms of their jobs than, say, I don't know, a tweet or a cat photo.
That's true. The stakes seem to be a little bit higher.
Yeah, just a little bit.
I don't know. I need my redundancy when it comes to cat photo delivery.
Right?
It's just me personally, but
So how are you guys overcoming challenges with security? For instance, with factories in China that maybe don't want internet at all on the factory floor, in terms of version updates and shipping things, or is it like once it's left the GE floor, is it forever out of your hands?
So First of all, I'm not the right person to talk to about security. We have an entire team of security people. We've actually acquired a company called WorldTech just to help us with cybersecurity and put us in a leadership position as a company to take that on. It's an enormous challenge. It's one of the challenges of our time, and it's very exciting to kind of be out the periphery of it, but I'm not an expert in security, so I can't speak to that.
That's totally fair. So, all right. So, getting back to Predix UI specifically, and specifically with Polymer. So, you are building these libraries for other developers to ingest and build whatever application they need to interact with the Predix platform. In your experience so far, so you said you've been doing this since about 2001. So we've seen, jQuery plugins, not this specifically, but just in web development. So there have been jQuery plugins and other ways of building libraries. What have you seen? What kind of reception have these types of libraries, and specifically Predix UI with its Polymer components? What's the reception been like with other developers that are integrating, that are potentially not using Polymer, that are have a server-side render app, or however they're deciding to build? Has it been mostly positive? Have there been any challenges?
Sure. So let's unpack that if we go back a bit. I guess I'll answer your questions either in reverse order, or last question first, or first question last, or you want to go back through the history, because it's pretty interesting if you want me to talk about that.
Please do. Yeah, please do. That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay,
I was on mute.
Okay. So we've actually got a member of our team who worked at Yahoo during the days of YUI, and when it was first coming out, and for me that was the very first time that I saw on the web, and using web interface, kind of a design system to simplify and expand the possibilities of UI development on the web. Since that time, obviously, there have been many attempts and iterations on what it means to develop a UI platform. We had our own that was in production from 2013 to 2015 called IIDX, the Industrial Internet Design Extensions and System, and it was really successful because it was based on jQuery and Bootstrap, and those two provided kind of a starting point and a platform for us to bring in open source UI kit and put together something that could be successful for developers and make them more successful at developing their user interfaces. It was so successful that my manager actually would get high fives in the hallway here at the office, because people were just so over the moon about the fact that developing the UI was the easy part, which is something that they didn't necessarily experience previously.
No, and I think that's the key, is that in so many industrial settings where applications are so very dated over time that it becomes very difficult to sort of develop on top of those things, right? You have a lot of legacy on top, and when you have components like UI that you can simply apply to existing devices in the field, that gives you instant feedback against that data, that is a very powerful case for use across the board of a set of components.
Yeah, and not to belittle our work and what I do as a UI developer, but that is not the competitive advantage for GE. It's definitely something that is important and something that will, in terms of experience, be really important. But we're not going to deliver a lot of value because of our UI. We're going to deliver a lot of value because we help someone get a job done that's really important. And the way that that happens is a developer who's working on, say, a machine learning algorithm or complex analytic or something in the future using blockchain or neural networks is actually able to develop the UI aspect with consistency and clarity relatively easily with lower investment, so that they can focus on the things they really care about.
No, and that's a very. I think that's. I mean, you've phrased it perfectly, because it is about the end value of the result of the thing that you're trying to do, right? Sometimes as developers who build components for grander use, you want a component, right, that's has a fairly clean API that an end user doesn't necessarily have to understand the entire inner workings of that thing to use it. It's like very much like the HTML that we all kind of came up with, right? Components can operate in the same sort of scope and sphere.
Yeah, definitely. And we can hand those to people and they can run with them. The way I see it is I'm enabling other developers to be more successful at their jobs. And we really take that seriously on my team. We're constantly doing developer experience research to dig into how are people using our products, each individual component and all of the components as a system, so that we can get that feedback that we need from developers to make better decisions about designing our components and the whole system and how it works together, and the documentation and the demos and the readmes, etc. And it's really complex to deliver something of value to, say, I don't know, like someone who's not really interested in working in the UI, but someone who is working maybe on the back end in a complex Java application or a .NET application, and they're not really interested in relearning or learning a lot of technologies like CSS and HTML and JavaScript. Polymer really gives us the power to deliver components that those people can use with a lower investment of time and learning.
That's awesome. So you mentioned earlier that Polymer, you've been waiting for Polymer for a long time in terms of features. It makes your development a lot easier. Can you maybe elaborate on what some of the problems Polymer specifically solved for you and your team with Predix and why you picked it? Yeah.
So I guess the easiest place to start is just the leverage it gives us in terms of delivering individual components. So with other frameworks and other libraries and frameworks, it's difficult to consume those outside of the scope of the application that you're working on, and it's difficult to move things around. What Polymer enables us to do is to deliver UI components that can be used outside of the context that we initially built for them, and enable people to get the same experience that we intend them to get. So that's really the first part. If you think about it this way, GE actually knows that it's one of the largest software companies in the world because of the number of developers that it has working around the world. And all those developers hopefully will use our components when they need them. And if we can't deliver something that they can actually use, then we failed. But what Polymer does is enables us to succeed, deliver those components, and enable people to get up and running with them very quickly.
That's awesome. So your team is basically kind of like the supply team for all these other developers, feeding them components that they can then use like Lego, right? And to further enhance their own application.
Yes, definitely.
That's awesome.
I love Legos. I grew up with them. My 1-year-old daughter just started using the big Legos. They're the best. I think of Polymer and web components as the Lego building blocks of a web UI, and we're able to deliver that ease of use and ease of development to our developers. Now, you said that we're like the supply team, and it's kind of true, but what's interesting is we're actually working on developing an internal contribution model based on what we call inner sourcing, which is something that someone at PayPal coined.
Yeah,
and
PayPal,
so
you're right.
We're already getting contributions back from that big, wide world of developers back onto our platform. And so now we're going to be more like the people who hopefully teach everybody in the company to fish. All the developers can make their own components and then feed that back into our system, making it even better. Long term, I think we're going to have kind of a federated model where we have many teams contributing back and forth between each other and sharing code across the company. It obviously makes sense for us as developers not to waste time reinventing the wheel, and it makes sense for the company to save money on developing things that have already been developed. So, yeah, it's very exciting.
Cool. It definitely sounds like it. something I always have to ask anybody that we bring on here that are interested in web components is, everybody's heard us talk about the four specs that make up web components, and Justin and I, from time to time, have had discussions about the importance of certain specs over the others.
Don't
and
know what
I
you're
was just
talking about.
But so I was curious what your views on the four separate specs are, because since you're using Polymer, you're using all of them. You're using imports, templates, custom elements, and shadow DOM, or the shady DOM shim, depending on browsers, of course. But so is there a certain spec out of those four that you think is most important, or something that you feel you could, if you had to only pick one, like, I'll take this and get rid of the others for X, Y, or Z reason?
Yeah, certainly. So if I have to choose, I would say that HTML imports are the most important aspect, but I don't think of them as yeah, and I'll explain why. Because if you can't import your template, then you can't make a custom element. So they operate as a system. I don't see these things as mutually exclusive. They're not independent at all. They completely depend on each other. And so if you don't have them all, you're not really getting the true value of what the web components system offers. So I actually list them in different order when I present about web components. I list them when I present people with them as templates first, HTML imports second, and custom elements third. Because what you do when you're creating elements and using them is you first create the template of what the element is going to be, right? Including any style and script that it needs. You then import it into your context where you're going to use it, and then you put a custom tag on the page that will then instantiate that element. If you don't have the HTML imports, you can't bridge the gap between templates and custom elements. And I remember back, about 5 years.
Uh-oh.
I was always trying to import HTML templates, my EJS templates, separately, and I couldn't do it. So once I had imports with Polymer, it was a really big step forward.
Very cool. I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. What is your favorite, Danny?
So I'm custom elements all the way. For the simple fact that you can make them with and it's largely because I've done a little bit of work with a lot of that stuff, where I'll do all of my templating as template strings in the component itself, and so then everything will just be embedded inside of everything will be inside of the JavaScript, so you can import it with just the script tag.
Yeah.
But I can appreciate when you are trying to marry those things together, why that makes sense, why having that ability to load in that chunk of stuff, why that's important.
Yeah, definitely. It enables the nesting.
Yeah, I'm always very curious about a lot of that stuff. Shadow DOM is the one that Justin and I have discussed in the past. Not
That's
that it's
a kind word.
But not the fact that it's not important and that it's not very cool, but I personally feel that it's actually been holding up web components from becoming more mainstream because of the limited support and just how difficult the problem is. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a fan of, if you're not using Polymer, that is, where you accept it, where it helps you out with a lot of that stuff, and you can get the shady DOM polyfill and things like that. But if you are trying to go about it on your own, you can get by with just custom elements, to me. And you can start using web components without having to depend on a lot. You can depend on one polyfill, say include this, and now you can start using this thing. But again, right. that is definitely just my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the good news is, I guess, Danny, is while I agree with you that shady DOM is maybe it's an icing on the cake. In general, there's more of a component-based UI architecture just moving forward, even with React. Just the shifting, the MVC pattern is really kind of dying on the UI, which is great overall. So it's good news for us.
Yeah, I agree, Amal. I think you are so correct about that. The component model adds so much benefit to the typical web developer's workflow and web application developer's workflow, and just ability to reason about what it is that we're working on and how it works. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, so people should take Danny's advice and Justin's advice and start thinking in web components, right? And forget about this encapsulation nonsense. Just think like with the component architecture in mind, componentized UI architecture in mind.
Yeah. Definitely. And so even smaller things, this is a complete sidebar, but even things like Vue.js do that as well. And Vue.js actually spoofs encapsulation as well. They do a very similar thing that Polymer does for its for Shady DOM, and the same thing that actually Angular 2 does for its style encapsulation as well. So even things that you wouldn't really think about how they do it, they are all starting to more and more be componentized, and a lot of them are more and more starting to try to resemble the spec of what a component is.
The platform as a whole has moved forward, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's taken us a long time to get to the point where we can even have the conversation about the spec that we can build on top of. Mm-hmm. You look at, now we've got custom elements v1 that's been sort of sorted out. Shadow DOM with slots, and the new v1. Has been sorted out. The big face-to-face meetings have occurred, and now here we are. And now we have complete component sense, like Predix UI. Vaden has some, and everybody sort of has started to build on these, and that's a very powerful sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, as it's been pointed out, that should help developer efficiency overall. You're not having to reinvent the wheel every single day, which, I'm not terribly a fan of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people are really tired of recreating new custom drop-down menus every time a new framework comes out. That's always been the one for me that just drives me crazy. I hate building those things, and every time you end up having to rebuild an application, you start up a new framework, you always have to make another one.
Oh, you mean you don't want to write another type ahead with multi-select?
I would rather not, if I could. That actually kind of leads into one of our next questions pretty well, which is in building Predix UI, what are some of the most fun or challenging components that you guys are building?
Good question. What are some of the most challenging components that we're working on? I think if you replace the word challenging with fun, it's easier to answer this question. So the most fun components that I think we're developing are the advanced visualization components that we're building with D3 and in conjunction with Polymer. We're working on an entire visualization framework. This effort is led by one of my colleagues. His name is Elliot Naiman, and he is really moving forward with a really exciting architecture for actually building not just one visualization, advanced complex visualization like a parallel axes chart, but actually a framework so that you can create your own parallel axes chart and build your own complex visualizations using Polymer, with D3 behind the scenes doing all of the drawing and redrawing. I think if you guys have an upcoming episode availability, you definitely want to know about the advanced visualization framework that he's been working on, and it's going to be out soon, so it's super exciting.
Also, that's really cool. Visualization stuff is always challenging. Everybody always appreciates when they can just plug in a chart and it just works, and having that kind of extra layer on top of it, because also anybody that's used D3 knows it's not, you can do a lot with it. It's not the simplest thing just to grok. It's not the simplest thing to wrap your head around. So
at first, yeah. My experience with D3 was that at first it did have a learning curve, and typical spoiled web developer, I just wanted everything to be easy. But after investing the time to actually learn some more about SVG, dig into the internals of how SVG is structured, and then dig into how D3 works with SVG, the kind of clouds open, and I entered a new realm of what is simple and what is easy, and I highly suggest that everyone go through that process, because you will recognize that actually what Mike Bostock has done is enormously simplified the work necessary to build SVG visualizations.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I also think that it's important for people to also, about D3 specifically, is that D3 is not a charting library, as it were. It is a visualization library that people will often use to build charts as data visualization, which is why you'll run into things like C3.js, which is a charting library built on D3.js.
Right.
I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up as well, because they see like a fancy visualization or something, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's done with D3," and then you just go through the huge block of code it's going to take you to draw that thing, and it can be intimidating. So having things like you were just talking about, where it's like nicely wrapped up, is very, very cool.
It's intimidating in the same way that learning a second language is intimidating. For natives, it's not intimidating. So I highly suggest just making that investment, sitting down with tutorials. There's enormous amount of tutorials online on D3 and SVG, and I think if you invest the time, you're gonna get back a lot of value.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's a whole other knowledge base, right? And I think it's one that's never really going to change very much, right? So it's a one-time investment.
The only changes are that they just keep making it better.
Yeah. So shameless plug for my favorite charting library, actually, with D3, NVD3, and there's a really nice Angular NVD3 for anybody who's interested in using that. It's great. So I actually have a question regarding architecture for you, Eric.
Yeah.
So when I think of all these awesome components, it seems like one of the larger challenges that we maybe haven't come up with a common pattern for is how to best architect and maintain all of these components, right? And in particular, where all these components interact, right? So how do we kind of manage that interface and whatnot? So can you maybe shed some light and maybe some guidance on what you guys did, what some of the problems you encountered were, and how you solved them?
Yeah, definitely. So we, like everyone else, have had to come up to speed on web component architecture and best practices around that. One big help was a book, I forget the author's name, but it's called Patterns in Polymer. And the author, one of the most important patterns that he covers in there, at least as far as our work, is the precipitation pattern. And the precipitation pattern specifies that data should rain down like the rain, and events should bubble up. And what this does is it enables you as a developer, and you and your fellow developers on your team. Sorry, the author's name is Chris Storm, by the way. Let me just confirm that. Hopefully you can edit this part out. I just want to get his name in there.
Yeah, sure.
Make sure if he gets credit.
We can add it into the show notes, so don't worry. You can keep talking. We can add it into the show notes.
Yeah.
Cool. So Chris Strom, the author of Patterns in Polymer, he outlines a few patterns that are important to follow when using a web component architecture, specifically with Polymer. And the most important pattern, as far as we have decided, is the precipitation pattern. And the precipitation pattern specifies that data comes downward and is bound downward from parent components to child components, and that events are emitted by child components up to parent and grandparent, up the nested hierarchy to notify the upper levels of the hierarchy that users have interacted in a specific way, or that data has changed in another way. And what this does is it creates convention, which is super powerful, because if you are able to think clearly about how your components are organized, then you're actually able to more quickly change things, more quickly build things. You know, when it comes to software development, the ability to change rapidly is really the name of the game. And if you're stuck with spaghetti code of events and data, you know, two-way data binding going each way, and events flying around and getting captured and getting shut down, and you know, it just doesn't work for our minds that can only handle maybe, you know, 5 plus or minus 2 or 7 plus or minus 2 things. You know, I'm a big fan of Rich Hickey, and he talks about simplicity and the value of simplicity in software development. And what he says is, like, no matter how smart you are, you're not amazingly smarter than any other human being, and you can really only think about a few things at once. And so the name of the game when it comes to successful software development is reducing complexity and only working towards simplicity so that you can then make changes later on to your software when you find out, hey, our users want this, or we need to add this feature or change this functionality or move this part to this other spot. And if you're familiar with the concept of tech debt, the component architecture really helps reduce the amount of tech debt that a UI developer is taking on to their code base.
Well, I would almost argue that it doesn't reduce the tech debt, but maybe it organizes it and encapsulates it, right, so that it's less of an overhaul and more of isolated pieces of changes that maybe you'd like to make, you know, at least
Certainly.
for me.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you just think about it in terms of purely lines of code, the components that I now write have fewer lines of code when I follow the conventions and the precipitation pattern and other patterns that we've come across because of following those conventions that Polymer enables. And so just by having fewer lines of code, that's fewer lines of code to maintain, that's fewer lines of code to write tests for, that's fewer lines of code that can break, right? Fewer moving parts.
If there's no code, there can't be a bug in it.
Exactly, and the best code is the code you don't have to write.
For sure.
Amen.
So this again actually leads into something else that I wanted to ask about, specifically about the Predix UI library, and that is, what are the, maybe not the exact components, but what are the types of components that are most used, and what are some of the types of components that your existing users are asking you guys to build?
Yeah, so the components that are most used, obviously the most general styling components to kind of make sure that the UIs that are being developed here are consistent with each other and have the same branded look and feel and the same standards of UI and interface and interaction design. So those are really the most important aspects of what people are getting out of our system. If you want to look at, you know, what are really the components that people are clamoring for, it's these advanced visualization framework components that Elliot's working on. That's definitely going to be something that we offer to our developer base that will provide the most value.
And have you found that most of your users are building their applications as Polymer applications, or have you seen more the other way where they're actually interoping them into other frameworks or you know, just other structures, not necessarily a single page app, but other server-side rendered apps and things like that?
So because web components are new and Polymer itself is fairly new, relatively new, we are in a situation where we have several applications that have already actively started being deployed using Angular as well as other frameworks, and so there is an interop concern and reality for us. And what we've done is developed a set of best practices on both sides, how to use Angular correctly in order to get the most with our Polymer components, and how to use Polymer correctly so that it interops well with Angular. We're actually developing a guide in conjunction with Google that will be available to developers soon to help with that.
That's super cool, and actually that like really leads into my burning question that I wanted to ask you right at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, GE is doing open source. What? You know, and so I went to a really nerdy school, and like GE hired like 30% of the people that graduate from my university. So you know, I myself was being courted by GE. So you know, I know GE, and I remember all of us having to do like blood, urine, life tests like before like actually working there. And so it's really, really, really refreshing to hear open source and the word GE in the same sentence. So can you talk a bit more about what you're doing in open source and what that's been like?
Yeah, GE thankfully has leaders that understand change, and the company's been around long enough to understand that you have to change with the times and move forward. And one of the aspects that has changed here in San Ramon is our activity in the open source community has grown significantly over the last few years since I started working here. Specifically, Predix UI itself is now hosted on public GitHub, and we are moving hopefully soon to an open source license where we can accept contributions. And I'm not sure exactly which license it's going to be, but we're really excited that that's happening. And as with any big company, there are a lot of concerns around that and a lot of maybe more steps than other companies have to take. But we are committed to it, and we're going to march it forward. Thankfully, we have leaders that are able to recognize the value and partake in that. We also benefit enormously from open source, obviously. So we only think internally that it's correct and beneficial to also give back.
Yeah, and then you're being paid to write open source, right? That's the other thing.
Yeah, it's very exciting as a developer to have your work actually be on GitHub.
Yeah, that's giving back.
Yeah, definitely. As a developer working here, I can tell you that it's refreshing and exciting to be able to participate in something that has a public-facing open source face to it.
I think it's also interesting that they are actually thinking, you guys are actually looking into changing the license, because open source doesn't mean, you know, designed by committee. It doesn't mean that, you know, like it's run as a democracy as it is. Open source just means that it's kind of you're putting it out there, and everybody can see it now. Everybody can take it and do stuff to it and things like that. But the fact that you are actually looking to change the license so that you can accept contributions and things like that is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, we're actually focused on developing an ecosystem, not just working on software internally to GE. We actually are building a platform, the Predix platform, to bring developers from around the world and all these industrial companies and other companies that aren't industrial to actually contribute to this platform and you know, benefit each way. You know, make it a two-way street. And so if we have customers doing, you know, giving us issues on GitHub and pull requests, that is the measure of success for us.
Yeah, that's all really, really cool. We are starting to get close to the end of our time here, so I just want to make sure, Amel and Justin, you guys have other stuff that you wanna mention, you wanna talk about. I just want to make sure we get to everything.
No, I think this has been a very insightful conversation so far. But I'm sure that we've probably missed something. So, Eric, tell us, what exactly did we not ask you that we absolutely missed?
Gosh, what should we talk about?
GE's moving to Boston, the world's greatest city.
Hey, congratulations.
Oh, no, GE's moving, not me. I already live in the world's greatest city, Boston.
I know, that's congratulations for you.
Did I mention that it was the world's greatest city? Just putting it out there.
Did I mention that we're recruiting them all?
This is where it happens.
I did not. Thank you. Okay, so you may have seen the Owen commercials. But I can speak directly as a developer who actually works at GE, not an actor on TV. that it's surprisingly refreshing to work at GE. It's a really great company, and the culture is really progressive and moving forward. And it's an engineering-backed company, so they really understand engineering and how to turn that engineering and science background into value. And they are definitely creating an environment where people can excel. So I definitely highly suggest checking out GE, especially in Boston, where you live, Amal. We're also hiring in California, where I work.
No, that's all. That's no, that is very cool. I wanted to ask you about the commercials at the beginning, and then I decided I was like, if he brings them up, we'll talk about them. But I'm glad you did.
Yeah, when I actually started working here, I joked with my manager. I said, we could be working at some cat photo company in San Francisco, and that would be really fun, but it just wouldn't have the value and the kind of the challenge, really, that working at a company like GE does, where there's over 300,000 employees worldwide. We operate in well over 190 companies, or 190 countries, I think. Global company, and working in trains, planes, energy.
Automobiles?
No automobiles, but we're connected, no doubt. Control systems for GM actually are GE. I know that much. So yeah, we are in the automobile business to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it's a really fascinating company. It's a blue chip company, like really one of the greatest companies in the world, right? But I think what's also really what you said to me that struck was that it's an engineering company, right? Like they get how engineers work. They've been doing this for hundreds of years, and and I think that there's a lot of really interesting things I think that they could bring to the open source community. So I'm really excited that door is kind of opening. So I hope you guys speak at OSCon or something next year.
Oh, that would be great. Can you invite us?
Let me just call O'Reilly. I'll be right back.
All right, Eric. Well, I think as Justin said, I think this has been a really interesting conversation. It's awesome to hear about the stuff that the GE is doing in the open source, and also specifically, we are big fans of web components here and Polymer. So it's awesome that that's a direction that you guys are going when you're building a lot of your stuff. If people wanted to get in touch with you, if they have questions, if they want to ask about contributing when you guys are accepting pull requests, how can people get in touch?
Yeah, so our organization on GitHub is Predix Dev. You can go to github.com/PredixDev. You can also see a page that kind of describes the UI platform at predixdev.github.io. And there you'll be able to get more information about what it is that we're doing. If you reach out to us directly, that's also perfectly fine. My email is knudtson@ge.com. knudtson@ge.com.
Awesome. Well, again, Eric, thank you very much. It's a treat, as always, to discuss web components and open source software development. So, again, everybody, this has been episode 97 of the Web Platform Podcast. Never say it at the end.
So close. So close.
I get to the end of the episode, and I can't say the thing. But this has been episode 97 of the Web Platform Podcast, where we talked all about Predix UI and Polymer. And Eric, thank you very much again. And Justin and Amel, I will see you guys next time.
It's been a pleasure hanging out with you.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at +the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson,
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.